I have loved and been guided by astrology for many times in my life. I've never encountered any type of astrology that could do something like predict the day you die. So the premise that she's there on, which is I could have stopped the assassination, is just not something astrology can do. It can do so many things. It can't be like Wednesday the 24th, you're getting shot at.
Is there anything more misunderstood in history than magic? Here's what your history classes conveniently skipped. The world was not built by logic and reason alone. It was built by something much more ancient.
The Hidden History of Magic tells the true stories of the astrologer in the White House, the intuitive who sat alongside Gilded Age tycoons, and the black ops government agencies that have used mediums to talk to aliens since the 30s.
These moments often get covered up, sidelined, or buried because they prove something. Magic is not fringe. It's used every day.
Because while we've been trained to trust everything but our own intuition, the people in power never stop consulting the stars. They know something we've been taught to forget. Magic is real, and we have access to it.
I'm Rhiannon Hauk.
And I'm Erin Bagwell.
We are psychics, witches, mothers, and storytellers ready to break down history's best-kept secrets.
Welcome to the Hidden History of Magic. Today on the show, we are deep diving Joan Quigley, the Reagan astrologer for 7 years.
We chat about her grudge with Nancy, why Joan didn't consider herself spiritual, and the tell-all memoir that outed her to the American public.
Chelsea Devantez, welcome to the Hidden History of Magic.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited and honored to have you. Chelsea is an Emmy-nominated writer and national best-selling author of I Shouldn't Be Telling You This, But I'm Going to Anyway. She's also a comedian, director, the host of the Glamorous Trash podcast, and our podcast mother because Rhiannon and I met in her Behind the Bangs book club. Chelsea, so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to have birthed twins. Two little witches.
Yes.
Witching it up on a podcast. I could not be more thrilled. And I will absolutely take credit as mother. Even if there was another mother involved, I'll call myself number one mother.
I think you are. I think that's safe to say.
Den mom, coven mom. Am I the Bette Midler of the Hocus Pocus?
Yeah.
Witches, you know?
Is that who you would be? Is that who you want to be?
I think of her as the mother of the other two, even though they are all, I think, just friends.
I think I'm the Kathy and a Jimmy, so this is fine.
I love that.
I'll be SJP. Great. Happy to do it. Happy to be the blonde. Chelsea, we're going to talk today about Joan Quigley, the Reagan's astrologer for 7 years. Had you heard about Joan before we bombarded you with this information for the show?
I had not, and it's incredible. And then, like a psychic moment, 2 days ago, someone mentioned on a meeting, they're like, now you probably have never heard of Joan Quigley. And I said,
Wow.
I am an expert for a forthcoming podcast, actually. And I really impressed them.
I will say that I was at a bar in Buffalo this weekend. That's a history bar. And the guy that's been running it does trivia. He's been doing it since I was in college. So like 30, 40 years, maybe this guy has been running this bar. History, memorabilia everywhere, flags, all Americana, okay? And he's doing trivia. And I say, do you know who Joan Quigley is? Not a clue.
Wow.
Not a moment. So we're really shining some light, shining some energy here on Joan.
I think history doesn't want you to know about Joan. That's how I think.
Yeah, I would say.
And I think both parts, well, I'll save it for later, but I have a hot take.
Love a hot take. Yeah, this will be very interesting because there's so much about Joan specifically too, where as a witch, love the role of astrology. And having read her memoir, eek, like she is the person that is behind the scenes controlling the Reagan. So I'm very excited to dive into her.
That was exactly, this is my hot, actually pretty mild take, which is that history doesn't want you to know about her because the Reagans, of course, would be like, no, we didn't deal with witchery and astrology and whatever. And then all of the witches and astrologists went, she helped the Reagans? Don't tell them. Don't say anything. Don't say anything. It's like,
Yeah, keep it
you
under wraps.
could not have helped a worse fucking president.
There's so much to get into. Before we dive in, Rhiannon, let's set the scene.
Okay, the year is 1988. Americans were wearing shoulder pads, neon aerobics wear, and cigarettes. You could light up at restaurants, bars, airplanes, office buildings, hospitals, anywhere really. We were listening to Heaven is a Place on Earth by Belinda Carlisle, and the famous "Greed is good" quote from the movie Wall Street perfectly represents the excess of capitalism in the 1980s.
But the UK just welcomed their first female prime minister, Margaret Thatcher. Meanwhile, Joan Quigley, the unofficial astrologer for the White House, just got fired because she was outed publicly in a tell-all from President Reagan's former chief of staff. But don't worry, Joan, who spent 7 years as Nancy and Ronald's advisor, is ready to write her own story and burn down the house that made her. Oh, Joan, Joan, Joan. I will also say I will be straddling the line a little bit on my opinions about Joan and what Joan has told me, because in our bonus episode at the end of this, I channeled Joan Quigley and I will be giving you some of her hot takes about writing the memoir, working with Nancy, working with Ronald. So we're going to get into all of it, and I might leave some sprinkles here or there. But I think it's important to start kind of at Joan's beginning and her relationship with astrology. Something I found that was kind of fun is that she wrote a column for 17 magazine under the name Angel Star. And she did astrology for teens before she came out of the broom closet as an astrologer, and then wrote astrology for adults and astrology for parents, which put her on the map, essentially, for becoming kind of a pop culture astrologer.
Wow, Angel Star. I mean, there was nary a 17-year-old didn't think this is a fake name. Like, what was you trying to do here?
That'll be the name I give the Starbucks barista when I go in next.
That's actually very fun.
Angel Star.
What I love about Joan Quigley is that she comes from the opposite of humble origins. She comes from like old money San Francisco, which is as old money as you can get for the West Coast, right? They're so old money. Her mom's name is Zelda. Her mom went to astrologers, and the thing that got her into astrology is Joan sat in on one of these consultations with an astrologer and is like, oh, wow, she can predict the future with such precision. And she's using math and science to do it. So it's very legit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Joan really doesn't identify as a mystic at all, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but she was very into the numbers, the science. She really considered herself like a scientist.
I also think that's a great sales pitch. Anytime astrology comes to me of like, you believe in science, right? Well, stars are science. I'm telling you the science of the stars. I'm like, I'm in. I believe in science, and you can tell me my future now. I'm in. And I think there's so much spirituality and mysticism to astrology that feels like that was something maybe she leaned into, because it seems like a Reagan might appreciate a take like that.
Well, and I think it's Joan's personality, because she spends her entire foreword in her memoir saying that she's not a psychic. They called me a clairvoyant in Don Regan's book, but I am not a psychic. I don't gaze into crystal balls. I use charts and math and science. And this is not woo-woo. It's legitimate.
Yeah.
She even goes on to say that Albert Einstein and Sir Isaac Newton believed in astrology, that it's one and the same.
Yeah. Listen, again, great sales pitch. I'm in.
Yes.
I'm in. I also think this is, I don't know what year, I can't do the math on this, but like, where is Miss Cleo at in history in terms of when she's writing this memoir? Because I do think there is a lot of cartoonery around woo-woo culture that she probably wanted to distance herself from in those years.
This is pre-Miss Cleo, which is great. But also, we are in the midst of the TV medium psychic as entertainment. Like Larry King is having psychics on his show. I think that Oprah was still entertaining psychics, but not in the way where it's like super soul Oprah yet, but we're in it's entertainment. Even Joan Quigley, right? She is famous. She is connected with the Reagans in the first place because she gets her connection through Merv Griffin because she does his show in the 1970s. So the TV psychic is already out there, and it's...
And doesn't she tell Nancy Reagan, I could have prevented your husband's assassination if only you checked his chart with me?
She does say she could have. She wishes she could have warned her.
Now let me ask you two true experts in the field. Have you ever opened up someone's astrology or done a tarot reading and said, oh, you're going to die today? Whoa, on Wednesday, you're going to die. Have you had that happen?
Well, Erin, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do death at all. I actually just had a client ask me when someone was going to die, and I was like, oh, I don't. That's a boundary that I have with spirit because I don't want to know when my family's going to die. So I just, it's kind of like a boundary that I have. But I'm sure there are people out there who would love to tell you.
And I'm sure psychics and clairvoyants, but specifically with astrology, of everything I've ever taken in from astrology appointments, astrology books, I am no expert. But astrology has never mentioned death days. Do you know what I mean? Like the fact that she's like, I could have prevented his death by looking at his chart. I've never heard someone even attempt to glean that information from a chart before this.
I think now is a good time in the show for us to ground down where we're at with astrology, because I will say that I am a psychic medium. I'm very woo-woo. You know, I'm up to all kinds of stuff. And I love astrology as this friend of in my spiritual journey. But I get a little bogged down with how precise it is because in my experience, it's very hard to be predictive and it's very hard to tap into a collective energy unless it has to do with the moon. And then I'm all in on like what the moon is up to and doing spell work around the moon. But I feel like I would never use the word skeptic, but I'm not like an astrology girly in the largest sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm
on Joan's side, but I'm also like, I'm a little in the middle on this one, probably for the first time in our show's history.
Huge.
Ooh.
Happy to be here for this day.
Well, I love astrology, but in the sense of, you know, when I was a teenager, I would go to Barnes and Noble and I would pull out the birthday book and read that. And anytime I had a friend, it's like, we got to see our compatibility. We got to look up our birthdays. And so I thought it was very fun. So I enjoy astrology for personal use, personal reasons, but more I'm like into the moon. Like I'm aware that we're coming out of a Taurus new moon and I understand what the archetype of each sign is. But if it's not in my chart, I don't really know anything about it. I focus on that. And so I think that I love the Chani app and Chani's podcast, and I will leave it to the experts who like to do the charts. I did one time tried to make an app where I know how to pull the ephemera or whatever, which is how you decide or you find out the stars and planets positions. But then once I was like, oh, I have to do something with this data, because that's all astrology is, right? Like you get a bunch of data and then you have to tell a story around it. And this is where things can get really flawed and chaotic. And I'm like, I don't know enough to tell these stories.
Yep.
Chelsea, where do you land?
I heavily grew up with astrology in my life. One of my mom's friends, someone in the circle was a famous astrologist at the time I can't say who it is because I'll out her. And she's currently even more famous now because of social media, but to a male musician. And she was like his astrologist and she like met with celebrities.
It's Bono.
You're not too far off, but it's not Bono. And I went and lived with her for 2 weeks and babysat her son in exchange for astrology lessons. Now I'm trying to be like, why did that happen? I don't know. The amount of times I've had my chart read are intense. And then I will say there's a book called The Love Cards, which is an even more precise mathematics from astrology dealing with like what's going to happen to you and what phases you're in that I lived by. Like this is a very heavy book that I brought everywhere with me. And there's a second book called Destiny Cards that reads you and another person's chart. I have me and my husband's chart was given to us for our anniversary. And also I've had times in my life where that book was like so distinctively correct. It's chilling. However, I do not follow that anymore, but it is, so it's in my bones.
Yeah.
It's within me, but I don't follow it. Like sometimes I see a meme and I'm like, God, I hope we're in a Taurus moon and everything's about to stabilize. Like, please let this be true. I want this to be true so badly. And I enjoy the meme and I move on, but I don't go deeper than that.
I like how things kind of find you when you need them. Because even as we're sharing these stories, I, of course, was in Barnes & Noble flipping through the astrology books. I had an astrology book of compatibility in high school. I would keep in my car and like check my dates, and make sure we were compatible. And I would never date Geminis. And, there are the things you do, I think, while you're kind of navigating the world. But it's
and who you are. Yeah. For me, it feels like how other people speak about being raised Christian if they no longer go to church. I feel like I was raised woo-woo and that'll always be a part of me, even if I am no longer going to church.
I love it. Well, we should say that Joan was on the Merv Griffin show and she did predict his divorce on national television.
Wow. How many months away was she from like
2 weeks?
It was
2 weeks.
Yeah. So she says in her words, this may not be true because this is in her memoir.
Joan's book? Okay, go.
In Joan's book, she says that she went on and predicted that he was going to get divorced. And 2 weeks later, his wife handed him divorce papers.
I need you to find that Merv Griffin episode. I'm sure it's possible either in the TV History Museum or someone beautiful on YouTube gave it to us. And we need to go back and see if she was like, things are shaky for you in the upcoming weeks, or if she said you're about to get a divorce.
Divorce is such a slam.
I know.
To out you on national television, that's wild. That should tell you everything you need to know about the way that Joan is going to move through this whole story.
Hi, Rhiannon here, just popping in to give you a spiritual tip that's going to enhance and elevate your life. A reading with my co-host, Erin Bagwell. Erin offers mediumship and psychic tarot readings that are perfect for checking in with your spirit guides, getting cosmic messages that apply to your life right now, and seeing who's supporting you on the other side. I personally have had the pleasure of experiencing a reading with Erin, and I was able to connect with my grandparents and my mom, and I got advice that has made it so much easier for me to navigate this chaotic world that we're living in today. You can book appointments right on her website or submit a digital question and get a response back in 48 hours. Check out erin-bagwell.com or click the link in the show notes below to get your reading with Erin today. She was so intense. And I guess because it almost sounds like he was challenging her, like, what have you got for me? And so it seems like, or at least that's
a little Alison Dubois from our Housewives episode. You get a little triggered, a little drunk as a medium, and you don't know what's going to happen.
Well, and I think if you have to start your memoir with like, it is legitimate science and math, and I had to come forward because there were hacks out there trying to claim just any person, it's deplorable. Any person can claim to be an astrologer. So she's so obsessed, where I think she's already approaching everything is defensive. And so she's going to pull out the big guns. And so apparently she made 2 predictions on his show. And the first was that he would get divorced. And the other was that he gave his son a large sum of money. And so he was like, I'm sold, I'm hooked. And he gave her phone number to, he was like, I think that you would love to get to know the California governor's wife. And it was Nancy Reagan.
Interesting matchmaking, Merv.
Yeah, and so they kind of hung out a little bit here and there, touched base, but the Reagans were actually working with another astrologer, Carol Reiter, and Jean Dixon was the astrologer who basically anchored him and guided him through his presidency. However, on March 30th, he's famously shot at, and Dixon gets fired, and they need another astrologer to take over. And that's when Joan was in, and she became their full-time astrologer. She made $3,000 a week, and that's when we have the famous conversation, which she writes about in her book. She says it verbatim that if they had been working with her, she could have warned Nancy.
Right. And $3,000 a week today with inflation would be $10,000. So if she's making $10,000 a week.
Which she shames Nancy at every turn because she's like, the Kennedys paid millions for what I'm offering you guys.
No, who did the Kennedys pay?
Unclear.
I think she's comparing herself to like a publicist or a consult, like an image consultant. And so she's saying, yeah, you They paid millions for this, and you're getting away with paying thousands.
Hilarious, because if some astrologist was guiding the Kennedys, they're the worst astrologist ever. Because everything bad happened to every man and woman in that family. So that's hilarious to even think they were getting any guidance at all.
I know. It's
People do
so
love
wild.
the Kennedys.
Well, I do want to say a thing about Jean Dixon, because Jean Dixon was famous at the time for predicting the assassination of JFK. She had put it in Parade magazine, and she predicted in the same breath that it would be a Democrat would win the election and that it would end in death or assassination.
Now, why Jean? How'd Joan get in there?
Jean was
because she
in
didn't
there.
prevent.
Yeah, Jean was the astrologer.
Jean was the one. Okay, I'm not following. So Jean had correctly predicted JFK. Then Jean gets hired for Reagan. She was like, has an off day. Reagan gets shot at. They're like, you're fired.
Yep. You got it.
Jean was like the White House astrologer for multiple terms too. Like not just Reagan. She was brought in for Richard Nixon, and he created a counterterrorism group based on her advice. Like Jean Dixon met with Richard Nixon in the Oval Office. That's how influential she was. And I will say that we don't have any SNL sketches about Joan Quigley, but we do have a Weekend Update appearance from Jean Dixon, because she was pop culturally like widely known as the White House astrologer.
I love the White House having an astrologer, but again, like JFK's life went so poorly, it's just hard to imagine someone was
well, those are all Republicans too, right?
Giving advice during those times. Nixon and Reagan, but not JFK.
Yeah, but maybe JFK didn't work with her.
Oh, that's true. She made the prediction in a magazine.
Oh.
As a horoscope. Yeah. So then she got brought in after
I think this is where it kind of gets political, where the astrologers are only working with Republicans. And Joan says famously she wouldn't have worked with Ronnie if he was a Democrat.
Now, why is that? Because she's
very conservative.
Isn't this a really interesting moment? Because for so long, woo-woo stuff was considered so liberal, so progressive, really not for conservatives. Now it's made its way back with Maha to be hand in hand. What do you make of that?
I don't want to give any spoilers, but we're going to get to what happens to Joan in the Republican Party, because the hammer comes down on her. Don't worry.
Oh, yeah.
She's not vindicated in any sense.
No. I just mean like the relationship of conservatives enjoying and wanting woo-woo culture around them. Like we're currently in that moment, and then back in history, we're here. But then there was like 30 years in between where.
Yes. Well, and I think that because she watched her mother get astrology readings, which would have been at a time, what we're learning through making this podcast too, is that a lot of the magic was previously mostly accessible to rich ladies.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And so it's the rich ladies that have always been leading the movement. And, I think Hassan Minhaj has a joke about that. Like, things are really hard, then they might be, really strict disciples of their religion, or if they are doing really well, then they're like philosophical Eastern, because they can ask questions instead of like, tell me what to do. And so I think that we see that a lot in the woo-woo space, because even this Maha movement, I'm so baffled by that, and like the mushrooms to Joe Rogan pipeline.
Yeah.
Where there's like a bunch of people having spiritual experiences, and they're like, okay, great. Well, now I'm a centrist and I hate everyone.
Yeah. Well, and I always think of it the opposite, because, if you drive through small towns, any small town in America, you always see the glowing sign for a psychic. No matter how tiny that town is, there is a psychic in every single town. You'll start to notice it now. And it is because when you do not have a hospital or a healthcare system, you always got a psychic. And psychics do trades. You know what I mean? And psychics take cash. And so if you do not have healthcare or access to a therapist or access to whatever, then woo-woo is also there for you, but not the expensive witches, I guess.
That's so interesting. Well, the other thing about Joan is that, she went to posh schools. She went to like the poshest private school in San Francisco. And so she was very conservative. And it's interesting because it brings up this idea of like, she was not doing astrology to see what was best for the country as a whole. She was looking at what would make Ronald Reagan look the best. She was looking at his chart and his chart only.
I mean, the thing about Joan, too, is the reason that she used the fake name in the 17 magazine is because her father didn't approve. And so she really, I think, from the beginning knew that she was stepping into territory that perhaps wasn't totally right for a lady. But we know historically, Rhiannon, to your point about rich people, kings, queens, popes, generals, people have always consulted astrologers, especially it's like was big in the Middle Ages, and the wealthy especially. If you've got an advantage, they're going to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So Joan goes on, and she basically is in charge of everything from when Air Force One is going to take off to when to schedule meetings. She schedules the debates. He famously has his acceptance speech at like 12:01 in the evening, which people thought was bananas. I mean, she was in charge of kind of every aspect of their schedule, and also says in her book that she gave Nancy plenty of spiritual advice kind of on the house. She said the astrology she had to pay for, but she would often give her advice as well. So she was an integral part of their administration for 7 years.
It's so difficult. I just love a witch being in the White House. Is that my next sitcom, Witch in the White House?
I know.
And I just can't stand Joan herself and helping I can't stand when witches help the cruel.
Like propping up the worst policies possible. Like that's the thing that's so upsetting, is that she did find the most auspicious times. And maybe that's why we're still haunted by the policies of the Reagan administration. We're still haunted by just say no.
Yeah.
And trickle down economics.
And make America great again was a Reaganism.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I'd be more impressed if she was behind any of that and not give your speech at midnight, but still impressive.
Right. Well, here's one of my beefs with Joan, because she says very plainly, explicitly, that we don't know Ronnie's, she calls him Ronnie all the time. I'm obsessed with that now. We don't know Ronnie's birth time because he was born during an era where the, birth certificates were just a little more loosey-goosey. And so she had to rectify his birth chart, which means that based on things that she knew about his personality and things that had happened in his life, she would go back in time and figure out his birth time, which she says is like a very official way to do it, but also because it's based on like personality, it's like totally on vibes.
Yeah.
So she is making decisions to the minute, which I didn't even know astrology could do that anyway, but she's making decisions to the minute using a birth chart that's not to the minute.
Yeah. From vibes. This happened to me. So we don't exactly have my birth time, and I was born late at night. And then my godmother would be like, I really think you're May 9th. Like, I think every time you read your astrology, like you should read May 9th because that suits your personality more. But I was born on May 8th. So, but it's really fascinating because it's just a feeling. It's just a hunch.
Yeah.
That she's obsessed with Ronald Reagan. She writes, Ronald Reagan's Jupiter is in Scorpio. Just physically, this shows tremendous vitality and almost superhuman strength. Scorpio is the sign of sex and procreation, among other things. Jupiter in Scorpio makes a person feel that his sexual powers come from God. This is what she wrote about him in her book.
She's horny for him via his chart.
Horny for him for
theory.
Sure.
Yes, my theory is that she hated Nancy so much because she hates Nancy.
Yeah, let's talk about how much she hates Nancy for 5 minutes.
Yeah, but my theory is that she hates Nancy because she wants to fuck Ronnie.
Yeah, I can get that just from that paragraph. Also, if Sagittarius is the most prosperous sign, why did she publish her book in March, which makes it a Pisces?
Oh.
Slam.
Riddle me this, Joan. Slam.
On page 28, Joan says, the first words Nancy ever spoke to me after she hired me is, I want everyone to love me. And then on page 34, she says, and while she wasn't really beautiful, she was very attractive, which I thought was the meanest thing she said
Also,
about Nancy in the whole book.
Want everyone to love me is not only perfectly fine, but probably the exact correct thing to say when you are the first lady. That was especially your job back then. Be the girl on his arm that the nation loves while he does bombs and bomb things. Like be Be Jackie O always. And so I want everyone to love me as like, yeah, you're a fucking lady in the spotlight. Ask, make that wish.
Also, everyone hated Nancy.
Yeah. So she knows what she's up. She's like,
she knew what she was up against. Her PR was bad, bad, bad. And really, throughout the book, she slams Nancy for just wanting to be in vogue and for wanting to be a socialite. And Joan was really like, you need to do charity.
Interesting. Now, that I do believe, because we have some Nancy Reagan accounts from the memoirs we've written, and she sounds rude as hell.
It wasn't a great relationship for sure. And I think, is it time for her firing and the hammer to come down? Anything else we want to say about Joan kind of in the mix of everything?
There's one part where she talks about the speeches that Nancy used to give, and she gave a talk about abortion. And she was like, oh, it was so cutesy and saccharine. And I guess that's how she used to do her speeches back then. And then another time, she starts this chapter where she's like, the most important person in my world died, my mother. And Nancy calls her the next day. And Joan is like, my mother just died. I can't talk right now. And Nancy's reply was, but Joan, this is very important. And so like forces her to get on the horn and draw up a chart, even though she's grieving her mother's death. But then there was also this, it's in the captions of one of the photos in her memoir, where it's Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, who's giving a speech. And in the caption, she puts, for no reason, we don't need this information, but she puts that Nancy was so annoyed that he kept protesting that she kept referring to him as that man.
And so first off, like, lame burn. Come up with something better, Nancy.
But the whole time, like, there are these little nuggets everywhere where if she can take a jab at Nancy, she will insert it anywhere. About how cheap she is, about how poor she is, about how bad her taste is.
It's also so, I don't want to be feeling bad for Nancy Reagan, but it is so sad to think of like handing your heart to a guru of sorts for 7 years and then having them slam you in their tell-all. I mean, it's hilarious given what the Reagans did, but
I think, not to defend Joan, I guess, but she ends up getting betrayed by them.
Yeah, and they're the Reagans. I mean, they can. I hope they're waving from down below. But yeah, let's hear the betrayal.
In the lava.
In the lava in hell.
In the lava.
Okay, so Don Reagan, confusing, right? Because we're talking about the Reagans, but this is Don Reagan. He's the ex-chief of staff. He writes a tell-all that essentially says on the first page of the book that the president's schedule was handled by the first lady and an astrologer from San Francisco. And basically all hell breaks loose. And everyone in the White House is like frantic. And essentially he writes that book because anything that kind of went wrong, he got blamed for it instead of being like, but it was Joan. I didn't want to handle that. It was Joan. And so essentially the press is kind of on a mad hunt to find who's this astrologer from San Francisco. And so it feels like for a while there was kind of whispers and inklings. And I believe the story goes that Joan was in France, ? And Nancy gets on the phone with her sister and tells her that it can never come out, that she can never go public, that people can never know about her contributions. Nancy says, lie if you have to. And they end up having a conversation, and Joan says, Nancy, I can't do that. I'm a reputable astrologer. Charlatans and imposters from all over the country are making false claims. I'm determined to show who and what I am and what I represent. I will injure you in no way, but I will not refuse to be interviewed. And then after that conversation, Nancy never spoke to her again.
Okay. Can we talk about this? Because I don't hear a betrayal in that.
Same.
I hear your boss, who is the first lady when press days were even wilder than they are now, saying, wish I would have made you sign an NDA. Please don't out yourself. It'll make things worse for us. I hear her saying, I'm going to do it. And then I hear her saying, and I won't be mean to you. And then I hear her write an entire book about what a bitch Nancy was. So I got to tell you, I'm not on Joan's side with that. What do you think? Do you think it was a betrayal?
No, I think that we already know that Joan replaced the other astrologer that was fired. And so, yeah, the Reagans were also looking for people who were just going to support their administration. Like it's such a wild machine to run a White House that it's the fact that this came out at all, I think is kind of incredible that Don Regan would say
that
publicly. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that he talked about this like color-coded calendar that was on his desk and he had to schedule around it.
Makes Reagan look unserious and I can't imagine his base. His opponents would love hearing that at that time. And I can't imagine much of his base would have respect for it. So,
well, and the other thing that we aren't saying is that Joan would call on a regular landline. And so they very much were probably tapping and getting information about the schedule and what the president was up to, what he was worried about. I mean, there was no way everybody and their mother didn't have Joan's, weren't bugging Joan's house.
Yeah. Yeah. My goodness. How interesting. And yeah, to go and then write this tell-all, I wouldn't say you're a reputable woman of astrology.
I agree with you guys. I think where I'm getting confused or cloudy is that when I talk to Joan later, she really is heartbroken over this friendship. And it really did feel like a deep betrayal to her. And there's more energetically we can kind of go into, but that was her true perspective on what happened. And I agree that you're doing a job, the job ends.
And now here's the problem with all of this though.
Yeah.
If Miss Ma'am is so good at predicting that she could stop your husband's second assassination, she couldn't be like, I'm gonna get fired on this day.
Chelsea, I had the same idea.
Yeah, and it's like, of course you can't. Of course you can't, Joan. But it's also because you can't do the other stuff either. You know what I mean?
Well, before her death she died in 2014, but Quigley said she foresaw Nancy's betrayal.
I'm sure. Uh-huh.
Struggle has been in my charts, she once told a reporter. She knew she could expect no gratitude from the Reagans, and yet she still did not foresee that it would hurt so much. And so this is the thing about astrology where I think that it opens the door for skeptics, where there's a lot of this, I could have done it, I would have been right, or here, hindsight is 2020. And so she's using a lot of hindsight to justify her predictions or what she foresaw. The other thing that I'll say that's a very important counterpoint about her friendship with Nancy Reagan is that they did speak weekly. They spoke weekly on a landline. And, Nancy to me is very Cancer, codependent, like, tell me what I need to know. Totally. I'll be who I need to be. And they only met in person like once. Yeah.
Oh, this is like how you fall. It's like how you fall in love with a man, and you're like, how
love
did you
is
give
blind.
Him? Yeah, it's like, how did you give him $4 million? It's like, oh, well, I met him once, and then he just sent me nice letters, and then I wired him a check.
Hi, Erin here. If you've been loving the conversations we're having and you are curious about going deeper into your own story, I highly recommend booking a session with my co-host Rhiannon Hauk. Her soul session stories are unlike anything I've ever experienced. She guides you through your own inner world, helps you uncover patterns, connect the dots, and can actually shift what's been keeping you stuck. I had a reading with Rhiannon about a year ago, and honestly, I think about it all the time. I think of Rhiannon as kind of like the intuitive's intuitive, because she gives you not only a connection to your guides, but this beautiful cosmic blueprint that can really ground you and anchor you on your journey ahead. She also offers 15-minute intuitive sessions if you're looking for something quick and focused, as well as one-on-one mentorship for ongoing support. You can book with her at rhiannonismagic.com/connect or click the link in the show notes below. Trust me, you're going to love your reading with Rhiannon. Okay, now back to the show.
I don't even think that she ever spoke to Ronnie, is the other thing. Is
she
that
met Ronnie one time and he kissed her on the head and he called her like Joni or something.
And that's it?
She has a nice little aside about it.
Of course she does.
Wow.
There's one time in her book where she talks about how she met with Nancy Reagan, and it was because Nancy had given her this open invite for tea, and she was like, I'm going to take her up on it. So she went to Washington, D.C. There was a state dinner for the president of Algeria that she went to. Of course, in the same breath, telling the story of like, oh, I got invited. I went to this state dinner. She also said, I didn't wear red, even though I wanted to, because Nancy would have hated if I wore red. Yeah. And then she's like, I avoided cameras and I told everyone I was a writer, but she talked to George H.W. Bush and predicted his upcoming victory.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But also that she didn't even talk to Nancy at the state dinner. It wasn't until the next day where she had tea at the White House. And that was like their sit down meeting. And she talks about how they basically just like gossiped about the night before, which of course.
Fun.
And yeah. And then Joan walked away going like, oh, I could see how this bitch would just like eat you up and spit you out whole and not feel a thing about you. And so it's like, there's no, again, but I guess the important context for this is that it is in this memoir that's like in response to the betrayal. And Joan Quigley is an Aries.
Well, that explains it all.
And so I don't know much about Aries. So, and you know,
Aries are the solo sign. They're the first of the zodiac. They're the big older sister. They're like, you know, Chelsea, if Tauruses are like stubborn, Aries is above us in like their, you know, bullheadedness.
Yeah. I think I'm feeling a little cloudy too, because again, because of how I grew up, I think I know a lot of main character astrologists where they're there and the job is of service. It's of helping someone else forge a spiritual path. But I think there somehow are a good chunk of them that are like, but it's about me. And like want to be the star. There's so many famous niche stories of like astrologists that helped on TV shows. And when the TV show doesn't go, they're outraged and they want their cut. And they're, you know, where it's like they have become entranced with the adoration given to them and are no longer actually being of service. And to me, writing a tell-all book for that Monday just kind of automatically gets you out of the like, I'm here for the good of the country.
Oh, totally. And I think to Rhiannon's point, like she wasn't really there so much for the good of the country as much as for the good of the Reagans. Like, you know, when you're doing somebody's chart and you're planning how to make them look good, there were a couple of times when, you know, Ronnie was in hot water and she didn't like have him meet with the press head on and deal with it. She had him hide in isolation for months. You know, there were real, you know, repercussions to her advice. And it was really just to kind of protect that family. It wasn't about like core American values, whatever those are.
Yeah. And again, you're helping the Reagans. So you are helping destroy the country.
Yeah. One of the times that she had him hide was when he should have apologized for the Iran-Contra situation, where it's like, oh, this was actually very bad. Just don't go out, period. And that's not how you deal. And again, if this is like a spiritual consultation, But
I think that's where Joan lost the plot because she thinks she's a scientist.
Yes.
And because she doesn't identify as psychic and doesn't identify as clairvoyant. And I'm going to go on a loop here, but follow me. We just did an episode about the Battle of the Fates, which is this Korean fortune-telling show. Yes. And there are yes and no answers based on the information. The tarot readers are reading the cards literally. They're getting the answers wrong. The psychics and the intuitives are reading it intuitively. They're getting the answers right. And so I do think when you step into these spiritual spaces, if you're not using a bit of intuition, I think you can misinterpret the information.
Also, if you're only going off of science and charts, how were you at a dinner party and predicted George H.W.'s presidency? Did you just know his chart by heart?
Right. I mean, knowing Joan, she went in there with everybody's chart and she was like, I'm going to tell this person this thing. I'm going to tell this person, because she's looking for clients, baby.
Get it. Get that girl boss money.
And here's the thing that is very challenging for me to say too, is because a lot of people, when they talk about
trigger warning for the woo-woos, trigger warning.
Yes. When people talk about psychics in history, period, it's that they can't be psychic. It's from the perspective that psychicness doesn't exist, that astrology is a scam. So you can only be a con artist conning people, right?
Sure.
It's very hard for me to say that I think that, not that she was a con artist, but I do think that Joan, because she's focused so much on the science and she's so focused on being right, because in her book, she is telling us just the story of all the ways that she was right. At no point was she like, oops, I got it wrong or I misinterpreted. It is just, here's evidence I was right. Here's evidence. Here's a way that I've twisted that even the Reykjavik nuclear arms treaty discussion, I made it the most favorable. So then I was like, oh, cool. Then did this treaty get signed? No. I had to like look up the history and it's like it fell apart. It's known as not a success, but I wouldn't have known that reading Joan's book. And so the fact that she's so obsessed with being right, that it makes me feel like she's a dangerous guru Khan, but not because astrology is not real. But because of who Joan was. Because the other thing is, so we talked about like, it's weird to me that she would predict to the minute. Like she would have Air Force One circling for 3 hours, just wasting jet fuel and tax dollars so that it would land at the perfect, most auspicious time, right? And the thing about that is that she's made them so dependent on her that that's a cult leader.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with everything you're saying. And it goes back to my original premise, which is I have loved and been guided by astrology for many times in my life. I've never encountered any type of astrology that could do something like predict the day you die. So the premise that she's there on, which is I could have stopped the assassination. It's just not something astrology can do. It can do so many things.
I mean,
it
but
can't
don't
be
you
like
think
Wednesday,
there could
the 24th,
be
you're
like
getting shot
bad planets that cause destruction and chaos and that they could land on certain days or times? I'm sure that's a thing.
For sure, but that is so ongoing. That's why the joke must be Mercury in retrograde is such a joke because it happens often. There's collisions, there's conflicts. Different planets bring positives and negatives depending on what space they're in constantly. And so I think the science or intuition through it is like how you said, analyzing that information. I've just, in my limited experience, have never come across anyone who could do something so distinct as to say the day you were going to die from astrology.
Well,
psychics, yes. Intuitives
but also,
would do that, yes.
You know, we talk a lot on this podcast about how predictive stuff is very tricky because your soul's blueprint, is complicated. You could have 3 points that, you could go out. It's not like set in stone. And so there isn't any one person who can identify or know in an absolute term. Things are always shifting. Frequencies are always moving. We're brushing up against other dimensions all the time. So there is no like one answer for predictive things. I think that's where it gets very tricky, in my belief.
And that's why I say the premise that she was there in the White House does make her a scam con artist versus a true astrologist.
Yes. And I think if we're also thinking about it as like, okay, so the role of magic is to have some kind of spiritual support. And then what is a spiritual journey? Is that so that we are trying to get closer to, I don't know, our own divinity, or like what is a spiritual journey in the first place? And so when I use astrology, the Scorpio full moon recently fucked me up. Like it really did. And I blamed the moon and a lot of stuff came up and it was intense and I cried for days. And
I always get my period on the full moon. Just what happens. These are the things.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the point of that, if there's going to be bad things, it's not so that we hide from it, but it's like, oh, here's this opportunity to discover who you are. What are the stories you're telling about yourself? How do you want to reframe it? How do you want to navigate through the world if this is the story that you're telling? And so to me, because Joan is devoid of the spiritual, it makes it really harmful because it's not about growth or the well-being or divinity of anyone. It's just about control. Because what is spiritual stuff without spirituality but control?
Wow. Yeah.
I mean,
Joan.
I know.
I still think it'd be a good Netflix show, her and Nancy.
Oh, but it has to be
like
so
a duel.
Hateful. Like a Ryan Murphy style
feud.
Yeah. I was so curious about why Joan was so obsessed with Ronnie and his perfect Aquarian, sentiment. Yes. Well, and like Scorpio, he's a like Pisces and Venus. And I'm like, is that the best Venus sign? I mean, I think it's one of them, but still I'm like, she's just making whatever is in his chart. She spent 8 pages writing about his chart and all of it was positive. Not a single bad thing in his chart.
Writing all about that Scorpinus.
And so I did consult my Aquarian friend because she does deal with Aries often as an Aquarius. Her perspective on Aries is that they tend to be really like impulsive and whatever. Because of that, they're really present too. And because they're present, they're like fun to work with and really helpful because there's no grudges ever. And I was like, Joan Quigley had a grudge. But then I realized, oh, this book is her grudge book.
Yes.
For sure.
She probably got it all out. And she wrote the book while she was hot on a grudge and burned everything to the ground in that very Aries mentality. And then she's probably over it.
And now when you said Aries was the first chart of the year, we're not talking January of the year. We're talking the astrological cycle, right?
Yeah.
Spring.
The witch's new year, spring equinox.
Okay. Just checking. Because Aquarius is January, right? Aries just passed because I also know an Aries. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Just had to align my top of the year lingo.
I mean, traditionally people studied the new year with the spring, of course. But then with the invention of Catholicism, the reason why we tilted the year over is because it kind of became this dark night of the soul situation where people saw the moon and the sun go so deep in the sky, they thought the world was over. And so then eventually, as you know, I think it's December 8th when the sun comes back into the sky, they had these big parties and these big celebrations. And so that's when Christmas got realigned to be end of December. And we kind of shifted our whole calendar to the end of December. Because of that, it became like one of our bigger parties as a human race.
Love that history.
Oh, Joan, any other Joan thoughts, feelings, things you got to get off your chest?
Well, I will say that I think that when it comes to a cover-up, that this is what sparked the battle of memoirs. You know, they say that you don't get in trouble from the crime, you get in trouble from the cover-up. And Nancy's attempt to quiet her and tell her to lie, just lie, whatever you do, lie, is the reason why we have all of this information in the first place.
Ooh, like some sort of Barbara Streisand effect, but it's the Nancy Reagan effect.
Yes. Although I think it had come out, you know, in Don Regan's book because he's like, get a load of this. Can you believe? And he was just trying to make money because you leave the White House and you write a tell-all. That's just like the pipeline, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's juicy. But I think it would have blown over because, again, at this point, Jean Dixon is on TV. People know who she is. SNL is making sketches about it. Like, it's not that scandalous, but I think that what we're finding is like the biggest pattern in the whole thing is that the way that people dismiss the use of astrology or magic in political history is by simply saying like, oh, it's a silly woman frivolity. Yeah. It was just Nancy being Nancy, and it's not anything real.
And that was the sword that they fell on. They said that Nancy had a lot of anxiety after Ronnie was shot at and that she needed to consult an astrologer to make her feel better. And we have TV and news clips of her even positioning him in weird ways during conferences and Ronnie being like, that's just Nancy. She's real superstitious. Like that was like a part of their shtick.
Fascinating. Yeah, because I don't doubt there were just like really powerful ways in which astrology and intuitives and psychics collided with politics. And this is just such a more gossipy, frothy one.
I mean, we know traditionally that they helped the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers. There were so many the mafia. I mean, intuitives are in a lot of big business.
They had seances in the White House. I mean, people consulted mediums. There was an official astrologer for Queen Elizabeth. So it wasn't even scandalous. But somehow it became frivolous. And I'm curious when it turned. We would start with like the Victorian era. Spiritualism was like huge, popular, rich lady seances, and it was all the rage. Jean Dixon consulted with FDR in the White House. And so people are consulting, and then at some point it takes a turn to be like, your silly little horoscope.
I mean, I think it's always a silly lady thing. Chelsea, we know this from your show that like when women do anything, we get kind of that underscore of like, well, it's just, you know, it's just a girl thing. It's just a romance novel. It's just a, a tell-all. There isn't that kind of weight to it. And I think that that's really intentional because I think people don't want us to awaken. They don't want us to find our gifts. They don't want us to feel connected. I mean, for the witch hunts, they didn't want us to even gather in community. Heaven forbid we got together. We would be in trouble. So they want to keep women separated. They want to keep women silent. I will say the astrology community, while I was doing research for this, is very mixed on Joan, as you can imagine. There are some people that kind of think of her as the godmother of astrology and kind of are excited about her relationship to the White House. And some people kind of, I think, Chelsea, to the beginning of what you said at the beginning of the show, it's like they're like, oh, I don't know if we want to claim her. She's not really one of us. So she's definitely a mixed woman. But I will say she dedicated her book to astrology, and it was one of the things that she held near and dear. And so to that, she held strong.
Yeah.
I love that she exists. I can't say I love her.
Yeah, I'm a complicated gal for sure.
I will say that I am walking away with the desire to be more like Joan, in that when I deliver a psychic reading of any kind, I'm like, does that sound right? Are we okay? Are you mad at me? And Joan, or you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Even though I know it's true, I feel very confident in it. I don't feel confident in the delivery. But Joan just walked in and you were wrong. And she's like, no, I wasn't. Here's how I was right. And so I think that we all can learn from Joan that if something is your passion, you can run with it.
You can make it to the White House, kid. Yes. And you can wear red this time.
Wear the red dress.
Boy. Wear the red dress. Chelsea, I feel like people already know where to find you, but do you want to tell them more places or?
Oh, yeah. Glamorous Trash Podcast, where we be reading memoirs. And one memoir in particular, Eartha Kitt, describes in detail meeting with Nancy and like how cruel she was to her and rude she was to her and didn't want to do charity work. So anyways, gone through the side of some women's stories, Glamorous Trash Podcast.
I love it. And I will do a shout out too for being part of the book club and being an official cookie. It's so fun to gather under the community and gab all about these stories. It's the best.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I met you both, I think, in our book club. I mean, I knew you before, but I feel like I truly met you through our monthly discussions of books, and we talk about pop culture.
So fun.
It's the best. Well, thanks you, Chelsea. We are going to roll into channeling Joan Quigley. If you want to know her advice to you about using astrology, on being in the spiritual line of fire, on her advice for female friendships, stay tuned for our bonus episode, and we will see you there. Check out a sneak peek of our bonus episode dropping this Friday.
Do I want advice about female friendships from Joan Quigley?
Joan Quigley.
Guys, you won't believe what I got.
If she knew to be nervous about us discussing her, then I say she's still got the skill. She's still got the gift, because that was a correct prediction.
She's like trying to get people to avoid things instead of experience things. And then what's the point of life?
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to The Hidden History of Magic. If you like the show, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. This show is produced by Rhiannon Hauk and Aaron Bagwell. A very special thanks to our patrons who make this podcast possible.
To join our coven of gorgeous witches, get bonus episodes, attend live events, and learn real magic inspired by each episode, join us on Patreon.
If you would like your own personal reading from Rhiannon or Aaron, check out our links in the show notes. Until next time.